I mean, it's either worse off or better off than it was. And I'm learning all the time. So what's the point of having a project car if you're not learning? Let's go ahead and move back to the next step, which I believe is to reinstall the gutter and the shift forks. So let's do that. All right, so this oil gutter is a $2.50 part, and what it does is it catches oil as it comes off of the... I'm on the wrong side. That's why this is not making sense. Let's swing it around. So this piece catches oil that's being slung off of first gear and then actually brings it back out to the back of the transmission. So it actually installs by slipping through here, and then once it installs, you flare out the back end of this piece. So we'll go ahead and then we bend this tray over. It's gonna be that easy for me, but I've got this punch and this. Before I get it all the way in there, I want this tray again turned to catch things coming off of here. And so I will work to turn it. Okay, that's done. Well, looking at this, I think that is pretty close. We're going to go ahead and tilt it just a bit more. You don't want it obviously hitting, but you do want it catching as much oil as possible. So we're going to go like this. Now, all that that's done, whenever we look at the other side, it's just a piece that gets flared out. Before I bend it, I am going to make for sure that I've got the orientation right. I believe I do, but before I do that, I will make for sure, and then I'll flare this out and bend this piece in just to be the catch. So yeah, not too difficult. So I went and checked, and this looks to be about the right angle. So we'll go ahead and bend this into shape like so. That just goes like that. I'm going to go ahead and just give it a decent little tap here. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and flare that out. And the way that we're going to do that is to grab another punch that fits in there, and then I'm just going to sort of take it and roll it around. There we go. I think this side got rolled a little bit too, just to keep it from moving around too much on this side. All right. Perfect. Too easy. Now, what should we do next? I believe it's a check ball. So let's go ahead and swing you back around. Clonk. This stinking thing, I keep smacking it. Okay. Let's take a look here. There are check balls that go in each of these, as well as these right over here that we have to reinstall. So we'll go ahead and look at that as we are installing the shift forks as well. We also need to install the shift forks, so let's go ahead and take a look at those.
Now it's time for 1 minute of learning. When you shift gears on this manual 5-speed transmission, you're using the shift lever to select a gear, but really how does this work? Well, thinking of a gear shift, you can either apply rotational force, left or right, or a forward and backwards movement. Both of these types of movements are transmitted through your shifter into the striking rod and a striking lever, which slots into one of these three shift rods, which uses the shift forks to push the synchronizer hub either forwards and backwards onto a gear. This has to be done in sequence that selects the gear pairs first via rotational movements, then the forward and or backwards movement to select one of those gears. If you attempt to move from first to third, it won't, because the gear lever has already moved the shift rod backwards by your forward movement, and the striking lever is now blocked from left or right movement. In case you missed it, in the transmission, first gear is behind of, not in front of second gear, because you are working through a pivot to select these gears. Each shift fork is held on by a retaining pin. These retaining pins were a little long when I bought them, so I just cut them down, and then I filed them smooth. That's what you see me doing here on all three of them. Here is the old single rolled, and here are the new double rolled, like heavy duty ones. So you can see the multiple springs in there. So, got that done. Now let's take a look at the sort of the transmission itself and the shift forks. So before I switch to time lapse, I'll go ahead and walk through this before I put it all back together. So I have all of these different pieces. This one's actually, I believe, half turned upside down. This longer side needs to go this way. But you can see that the bottom, that the fifth and reverse collar actually has a piece that is there for the third and fourth shifter to slide through, and then first and second are sort of off on its own. Each of these will have one detent ball put in here, and then in between here will be two detent balls, in between here will be two detent balls, and then right up here on the top will be a single detent ball. And so that's how it's all held into place. So you start out with fifth gear, sliding it in like it is, put in the ball, and then put in the rest of them. But I just wanted to sort of see how it looked before I put it all completely back together. Again, one of the things that you want to make sure to do before you put on these collars as well is oil up the different parts, like the shift collars that will be moving it back and forth. So that way things can spin and move around there. So let's go ahead and get to it. I'm going to go ahead and put you into time-lapse mode, but that's what we're going to be doing. Yeah, so it was at this point in time I started to panic a bit. I have to go check the reference manuals a couple times just to see if I'm doing it correctly. I've put these in wrong. This one is supposed to be flipped and put right here, and this one is supposed to be right here. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, drive these out and then flip them around. I also I've already removed this detent ball. I'll have to remove this top detent ball as well, I believe. So let's try it again. Well, it was only a small panic attack. I had swapped this and this. The way I should have known it is I remember being able to drive these pins out without them interfering with the next one down. And so this one I can drive down, right? This one actually interfered here, as you saw, and I had to like use a cutoff wheel, which is not what you want to do. But I now have the ability to shift through all the gears, so that's good news. I couldn't even get it into fourth gear earlier, or third gear. It's still not super easy with nope. First gear and second gear. Then reverse. Okay, so now I'll shift in all the gears, as well as not shift into gears. So I'm going to stake these nuts and move on out.
So I have this gear oil gasket maker specialized formula that I'm going to attempt to use here. Reading the directions, because that's what you're supposed to do. It says for best results, surfaces should be clean, dry, and residue free. So I've cleaned both surfaces with brake fluid, and I've sprayed out the inside here, got rid of all of the excess sort of RTV that was already in there. And then it says cut the nozzle to the desired bead size and apply a continuous 1/16 to 1/4 inch or 2 to 6 millimeter bead of silicone to one surface, surrounding all bolt holes. Assemble parts immediately, finger tighten bolts until material begins to squeeze out around flange. Allow 1 hour, then tighten to torque specifications. Allow 24 hours to fully cure before filling with fluids and returning to service. Allow more time to cure in cold or very dry conditions. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and see if we can. Yeah, sorry, some things are easy to do without the camera recording, or sometimes I just forget. I went ahead and dropped the transmission into the front housing and went ahead, and then I'm now trying to slip on the tail housing and getting that into the right spot. You have to make for sure that the shift levers actually are appropriately where they need to go, so that way they pivot around the correct spot. Once I got that done, I'll go ahead and tighten everything back, and like the instructions say, I tighten down to finger tight until it starts squishing out, and then I let it sit, and then I tighten it to torque specifications later. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing this, but that mark right there that I'll point out on the screen here in a second is the shift fork, and if you look behind it, you can actually see as I move the shifter around. Let's see if I can. Oh, perfect, guys. This is gorgeous. Okay, so that's sort of the lockout pin for reverse, right? Okay, so you can see the three different. I'll mark them here, 1, 2, and you can barely see that third one over there. But so we go all the way over to first, and then we go first gear. Okay, it comes back, goes up, and that is second gear. Okay, now we're going to move to just the middle neutral position, right? So up be third gear, so we'll go, sorry, that's third gear, that's fourth gear. Okay, that's neutral again, right? Okay, now we'll go over to fifth gear. There's fifth gear, and there's reverse gear. So hopefully that'll all make sense to you, and I actually really think that this right here will be a very cool thing to see. So if I put it again, if I put it all the way in first gear, and then I'm going to off camera rotate through the gears and make for sure that the rear piece is spinning. So I'll go ahead and do that on my GoPro. Actually, I'll probably put it up on the bench to ensure that I've... Alright, so I just cut to my phone video, so hopefully it matches up pretty okay with the rest of this video. But now that I'm back, I'll go ahead and put in the reverse lockout. Again, noticing that this piece is different than this piece, like the difference between center is off. And you look here, the difference between center is off. So that gives you a good idea on where to place these pieces. And it's just a... Now that is where it needs to go. So that's there. We can go ahead and start those bolts in, which are two smaller bolts. I believe are right here and right here. And there's an O-ring that seals this. Now we're going to go ahead and move this onto the workbench so we can put the front plate on. Let's go ahead and cut to the workbench. let's go ahead and get this transmission up on the workbench. Luckily, I've been lifting a lot of weights lately. That's not true, that's a lie. Okay. Here you see these different pieces. So I've already sort of attempted to clean off this a bit. You can actually see the shift forks here. So let's run you through the different gears again, see whether it works. Okay, first gear, second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear, reverse gear, first gear, rotate. It is in fact rotating the rear gear, and I can not rotate it freely like I can whenever it's out of gear. Second gear, it is in fact rotating it. Third gear, it's rotating it even faster, almost 1 to 1, rotating it 1 to 1. Okay, and more importantly, reverse. Oh, it's rotating it backwards. Hey, look, that's the way a transmission's supposed to work. Now that we have all that where it's supposed to go, let's go ahead and, man, I should have cleaned this off, this interior piece off better. There's still crud right here. I don't know why that always takes me so long to do, but once I got it figured out, it wasn't that bad. So now we've got the throw-up bearing on, and we are going to put the shield on, and then I'm going to go eat lunch. It goes with the ears holding this in place, so, and then this pivot point back here. So now that we've got all that done, you can sort of see this. This goes towards the back of the car because it goes down into the groove of the clutch fork. This goes into the groove of the back side of the clutch fork, so it'll actually sit in like this. So we go from the outside, like this, then swing it around, easy as pie. Super easy, right? There we go. Alright, so now the transmission's almost all put back together. I have a new reverse switch, so let's go ahead and get that put on. Here, just place this piece in. We also have to tighten up the rest of the bolts and put on the circlip right back here. So we'll do all that off camera. But understand, I'm going to tighten that. This is still, I'm going to make sure this is loose so I can put the oil in it, and then everything else is sort of ready to go back in the car. So we'll have to go under the car and put back on the clutch before we mount this thing back. Alright, so the next thing I need to do in order to put this on the car is I actually need to go ahead and put the clutch back in the car, like so. But as I was working on stuff, I realized that I actually didn't have a clutch alignment tool here. I went and looked for it and I couldn't find it. So I modeled one in 3D and used my 3D printer to make it. So as you see, here is a sort of exact replica almost of the input shaft for the clutch and the transmission, excuse me. So now I can just go like so, and there you go. So let's go ahead and put this clutch back in the car. Down of how I created the part. I actually started with this center part here, and then finally decided on this part over here to the right. So let's go ahead and take a look around sort of what the differences are. The main difference is the amount of distance I gave myself on these splines. This first time they were too thick and they were binding when they were entering the center shaft of the clutch, and so I ended up giving myself a little bit more room to do that. And the way that I did that, you can see I started out with this sketch. Once I created these sawtooth patterns, I then went ahead and replicated them around the entirety of the piece itself. So you'll see that's sort of what I did here. On this right piece, you'll see that I gave myself more of a clearance to do that. So if I look at this, here to here is about 1 millimeter versus when I look at this, it is about 0.75 or 0.78 millimeters. So that little bit of extra space allowed it to slide into the pieces much better. And then once I got that sort of done, I then extruded the pieces out. So you can just sort of see here where I extruded out the actual sort of gear piece. I actually did a couple test prints, just like about 2 millimeters tall of this, to make for sure that it worked. Once it did, I went ahead and extruded the bottom piece to make for sure that it didn't slip all the way into the clutch. I then extruded the outer piece and then the retaining collar there, and then went ahead and added the chamfers to the sides, there on the top of the gear teeth, and then there to the front, and combine it all together as one piece, and then hit print to send it to the printer. But yeah, I hope you find that useful. This is out on Thingiverse. I'll go ahead and make for sure to throw a link down in the description below. Feel free to use it if you've got an old Nissan. So each of these 12 millimeter bolts goes into the flywheel. And so I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on these, so the medium strength ones, and then I'll go ahead and put them in along with the clutch disc and the pressure plate. So you don't really need to have the clutch aligned right away, but I do see some oil on this plate, so we're going to go ahead and clean that off real quick before we start. So the clutch is back in the car. Now we need to get the transmission stabbed onto that clutch. So I'm going to do the thing I hate, which is stabbing a transmission onto a car. I'm going to use the jack, and I'm also going to use one old head bolt from the Figaro that I used earlier in this project. I'm trying to find, I'll have to find it, but it's around somewhere. I'm going to use that to give myself like a sliding dowel, and that I can sort of wiggle and rotate along as I place it inside the bottom part of the transmission. I'll sort of show you how I'm doing that here in a second. I'm going to use an old head bolt as part of a guide to try to help me stab this transmission back onto the car. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to screw this into the block, and then I'm going to lift up the transmission with the jack, and I'm going to sort of use this to help guide and then sort of rotate and move around the input gear of the transmission. Hopefully, doing all of this will help me stab the transmission back onto the car, which is usually one of the more difficult things to get done. So we'll go ahead and move the transmission down to the floor, get it underneath the car, and then attempt to get it back up into the correct location. GoPro, stop recording. It took a little bit of persuasion, but the transmission is now fully seated with the input shaft inside of the clutch and resting against the block of the L20B. And so I went ahead and snugged it up with a couple upper bolts, and now I'm going to go ahead and install the rest of the pieces. This is a Technotoy tuning crossmember mount for the transmission. So I went ahead and put that on and then snugged it up with the bolts into the cab of the car. Moving on to routing the emergency brake cable or the parking brake cable. This was pretty straightforward, although I had removed some parts early on as I was trying to work on the different parts of the rear end of the car. So we have bolts here along the back side of the transmission, one right sort of center, and then up and to the left on the top of the transmission. Moving over to the starter, you'll see the flywheel behind that, and then up above we also have multiple bolts that need to go in the top of the transmission. So let's go ahead and see if we can start putting those bolts in. These, if I remember correctly, are 14 millimeters that hold both the starter as well as the transmission to the engine. In the next part of the video, I'm going to fill up the transmission with this MTL Redline oil. Once I get that done, I'll actually be done with the transmission. I'll probably go ahead and start it up and put it through the gears slowly, and then recheck the level before I drop it off the jack stands. Once I get done with that, I'll go ahead and open up the garage and I will take it outside and run it around the block just to see what happens, then come back and check all the bolts and everything like that. With that, let's go ahead and do the final bit of this part of the project. I don't have a GoPro mountain here, so bear with me. But I'm taking you on the first drive. I don't have a circlip in the... There. The fixing of the transmission, I need to go ahead and install the shifter. So I've already placed the shift bushings into this housing. They just slide in. I can't even get them out right now. And now I need to put them into the ears. Now they're actually so tight here that they're actually scraping along the side, so I'm going to leave them sort of alone. But just place them in here, make for sure that I've got the gear shift pointed the right direction so it's angled up over towards the driver and then up again. So sort of place it there. Because I'm incredibly slow and I was trying to do a good job here, this actually took about 10 minutes to do all this work. Pretty much using a small hammer, I tapped it into place, it being the shifter, and then I went ahead and used the new pin, not the new pin, just a pin, slid it in, and then connected it with the circlip. Really what took the longest time in this whole process was the actual upper dust boot that was being very non-compliant when I tried to place it on top of the transmission. Once I got that sorted, it all went in just fine.
Hey, thanks for watching. We now have the transmission back in the car. I'll take it out for a drive, sort of show you guys the car. But this is the end of this video. Tune in next time whenever I adjust the valves on the car.